So, what are your thoughts? Starting, that was a lot. I'm assuming you were looking. It looked like you were looking back at the scriptures quoted, the Psalms. I think.
Yeah, that's what took me so long. Because I'm trying to understand. Seems obvious that the reality that we've been born into is fractal, and that the Bible maps out that fractal, and that Jesus knew this, and that what it means to be a prophet is to perceive that fractal pattern and to be able to look into the future and anticipate how that pattern will unfold. And David seems like an important person who did that. And David in particular seems to be I was just looking through the notes in Psalms, and John MacArthur refers to David as the lesser David and to Jesus as the greater David, which I had never heard before. David was like Jesus. He was a lesser Jesus. He wasn't perfect, but he sincerely sought God. He was a man after God's own heart. And what that made him into, his sincerity and his devotion, what that made him into was someone very much like Jesus. And so the experiences of David are similar to what Jesus experienced, because when a person like that exists in the world, the rest of the world responds to them in a certain way. And so then it seems that Jesus looked back on the Psalms of David and recognized himself in David's words, because Jesus himself quoted David's words.
Mm-hmm.
Peter is he has the longer quote, "I saw the Lord always in my presence, for he is at my right hand," etc., and indicates that that was not talking about David, but it was talking about Jesus. I mean, it was talking about David, but even more, it was talking about Jesus.
Like, yeah, right. Found it very interesting reading that. He's very confidently saying he spoke concerning the resurrection of the Messiah. In verse 31, he says he spoke concerning the resurrection of the Messiah. But reading it, so the same thing. I totally am on board. The first thing he said was reality's fractal. I'm like, yep, here we go again. Buckle up. It's fractals again. Because like reading the psalm, it's not clear. It seems very much like David is talking about himself.
And he is.
And he is. And
he's talking about Jesus.
Right. And it's just,
yeah. And he's talking about anyone who sincerely pursues God with their whole heart, because we become like David and we become like Jesus. And so I was looking at how Peter is quoting these things, because the question in my mind is, what did Peter learn in those 40 days? What did Jesus reveal to him that is giving Peter such confidence? How is Peter reading the Old Testament and understanding the fractal message of the Old Testament and applying it here?
Because it's like people are the tool with which God has written the Bible. So God's writing the Bible through us and sharing truth the way he sees it. So the Bible, it's like our guidebook in this reality that's bound by time, but an understanding of God's word allows you to look at our reality, turn it sideways. Our reality is bound by time. God is outside of time, and he looks at our reality differently. And it's like an understanding of God's word allows you to see reality like God does. So like it's like if you're picturing our reality as a little constrained, bound by time, beginning and an end, and then you turned it sideways and made it clear. So now you can see through it all at once. That's that's what it seems like an understanding of the Bible gives you. So it's like Peter's able to go, oh, I can just see through time. Like this is talking about, yes, right now, this is talking about, David's talking about himself. He's talking about the Messiah, and he's talking about everyone else that follows God's narrow path.
Mm-hmm.
And allows you to see all the truth at once, and then be able to go, oh, I'll cherry pick this because I'm technically taking it out of its written context, but I'm not taking it out of its greater context.
Mm-hmm.
The way God
Mm-hmm.
wrote it and the way God is expressing this truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's like whatever. So it's whatever Jesus taught them allowed them to understand this fully, it seems.
It seems like it. That
Because I can
that
say
image of
this, but I don't understand it fully.
right, right, which is why it's really interesting. That image of looking at time and then turning it and looking through it, that's awesome. That's spot on.
Thank you. I appreciate
That's
it.
really good. And yeah, like I want to be able to do what Peter is doing here,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like then you could actually read the Old Testament, and you read it as a history, it's a story, and so that's good, but you also read it as something that's revealing these fractal patterns that are 100% equally relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago when Peter was quoting it, as they were 1,000 years before that when David was writing it. Like, I want to know those things. And so it's interesting to see, what does he choose? So he goes to Joel to indicate the time, and then he goes to the Psalms, David, and he quotes, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for my feet." So that is Psalm 110.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus quoted that. He's mentioned quoting it in Matthew and Mark and Luke. So all three of them mention Jesus, which these would be the synoptic gospels, right? Those three.
I suppose. Yeah, that sounds right. Or I should rather say that I've heard that term, and
Yeah.
if you're saying it, then sure, it probably is right.
Well, don't take my word for it, because I'm kind of in the same boat, but I think it means that those three correspond closely together. And I think that they served for sources, like maybe Matthew served as a source for both Mark and Luke. And then Luke kind of like did his own research and added some things from interviews and things like that. But anyways, all three of them mention this. And so it's seen as significant, even if the other ones were just like saying, okay, Matthew thought this was significant, so I'm going to include it. At least Matthew, out of all of the things that Jesus said and did, thought it was significant enough to include it in his document. And so this is the context where Jesus quotes this psalm, is that the scribes are after Jesus. In Luke, wow, Jesus quotes Psalms twice, right, in this vicinity. So Jesus is teaching in parables, and at the end of the parable of the vineyard owner, he sends a slave to the vine growers so that they would give him some produce, but the vine growers beat the slave and sent him away empty-handed. So he sent 3 slaves, and they kept doing the same thing. So the owner sent his son, and the vine grower said, "Let us kill him so that his inheritance will be ours." So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy these vine growers and will give the vineyard to others. So Jesus at this point knows he's speaking of himself in the parable of the vineyard owner. I'm in, I don't know if I said this, I'm in Luke 29. That's and on. That's the parable of the vineyard owner. So Jesus is talking about the vineyard owner sending his son and his son being killed by the vine growers. He knows he's talking about himself. The people that Jesus is teaching say, "May it never be." But Jesus looked at them and said, "What then is this that is written? The stone which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone." So that is Psalm 118. The scribes and the priests tried to lay hands on him that very hour, and they feared the people, for they understood that he spoke this parable against them. So that's Luke 20:19. The scribes and chief priests understood he was talking about them. Because so after this, so he says, the stone which the builders rejected became the chief cornerstone. That's David. And then Jesus says, everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, but on whomever it falls, it will scatter him like dust. The scribes and chief priests tried to lay hands on him that hour because they understood that he spoke this parable against them. So they watched him. They sent spies who pretended to be righteous in order that they might catch him in some statement. And so then they started questioning him. So they're coming up, they're pretending to be righteous, but they're trying to catch him in a statement, which is what we know they do, but here it's happening. So they're asking him about Caesar. They're talking about resurrection, like the married woman, like whose wife is she going to be if she has 7 husbands and 6 of them die? And so he just answers all their questions. It's no problem for him. Then Luke 20:41, he said to them, how is it that they say, he turns it back on them. How is it that they say the Christ is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for my feet. So David calls him Lord. How can he be his son? So it's like, enough of this. You're fools. Can you answer this? No, you can't, because you don't know anything. And then while all the people were listening, he said to the disciples, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and love respectful greetings in the marketplaces and chief seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets, who devour widows' houses and for appearance's sake offer long prayers. These will receive greater condemnation. So he knows what they are. He swats them away like flies, and he turns a question around on them that they don't understand. So Jesus, he just told the parable of the vineyard owner. He knows very well who he is and what his destiny is. He knows that he will be killed by these people. And he's talking to them right there. And then he says, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. So he knows he will be killed, and he knows that these people will be a footstool for his feet. Well, then if you look at Psalm 110, after that quote, it says, the Lord will stretch forth your strong scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people will volunteer freely in the day of your power. The Lord is your right hand. He will shatter kings in the day of his wrath. He will judge among nations. He will fill them with corpses. He will shatter the chief men over a broad country. He will drink from the brook by the wayside. So Jesus knew what this psalm was talking about. Now, Peter's quoting it in Acts 2. So Peter understands that Jesus was talking about himself when he quoted Psalms, which means he understands that David was talking about, well, consciously or not, he was prophesying. Well, no, I mean, he must have been here. He must have seen something.
Yeah, I looked at the Hebrew for that psalm, and I was like, what is it? Because I've heard that a lot, and it's the assumption. But even further evidence, because of what you just quoted in context in Luke there. So it's very obvious, like, yes, okay, it seems obvious, but what is this Lord, my Lord thing? And the word, the first Lord, like this is the direct the way that it starts for mine. Psalm 110:1 is, this is the declaration of the Lord. And that word used is Yahweh. So the word for God, the word, like the name of God. So Father God, to my Lord, which is just a general kind of word for master. So they are different. And it does seem like it's talking about God to my master. And it seems contextually being like, well, who is that? Messiah, I suppose, because he says forever in verse 4 there, you are a priest like Melchizedek, which we've kind of talked about a little bit. Like I said, interesting study worth doing. So there are things even in there that like seem to be like, okay, like sometimes you get Psalm 16, which is like David speaking about himself. This is a very personal thing. He also happens, whether he knows it or not, to be speaking about the Messiah. And then we get Psalm 110, where he's like obviously seeing something very unique here and obviously talking about the Messiah. And so you get both, which are very interesting out of David.
Mm-hmm. And so what Peter is doing is revealing this to a large crowd. Like the things that you and I are realizing, he's showing this to them.
And to those who also, he's like showing it to them perfectly, because these people know they can follow it. They absolutely are able to follow the path that he's taking them down. They're familiar with this text. They're good Jews. They're there in Jerusalem on Pentecost. They're good Jews.
I think
so they know these.
Yeah, like they're making the journey. They've studied it their whole lives. I imagine one of the things that I try to do when we talk about things in the Bible is connect it to something that I've experienced. so that I can feel what it might have felt like to be one of these people. And like, I was raised in the church, and so I knew all of the Bible studies. I mean, all the Bible stories. I knew what, like, kind of the basic stuff of Christianity. I just didn't believe it because, like, I had questions that people hadn't answered, and I had seen hypocrites in the church, and so I thought the whole thing was nonsense. But then once God started to open my eyes, sometimes through conversations with people who were the real ones, then I started to look back on the things that I had learned when I was a kid and say, oh, that's what that meant. That was true. So it's like I knew it, but I didn't know what it meant. I hadn't connected the dots. And I imagine that must be what it felt like to be one of these 3,000 listening to Peter. It's like, I've studied this forever. I'm, maybe I like actually really care about God, or maybe I do this just kind of because it's what you do. Maybe I really like going to Jerusalem and celebrating Pentecost and like seeing my friends that I haven't seen in a long time. I don't know. And then they're like, oh, wait, here's this guy. And Peter's saying, Jesus of Nazarene attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs, which God performed through him in your midst, just as you yourselves know. This man delivered over by a predetermined. So he's speaking as if they're familiar with what just happened, which doesn't really make sense. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that.
Yeah, because even in 32, he says, God has raised this Jesus. We are all witnesses of this. But like, aren't these guys supposed to be traveling from out of town?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, when he says we, that could easily mean only the.
Yeah, that's true. Their group.
The 11 or the 120.
I mean, he's still talking in Jerusalem, so it's not going to be there's a lot of people visiting, but there are, I mean, obviously a lot of people who have been there. This happened a month ago, basically, a little over a month ago. Like, there are obviously still a lot of people around that are of course they remember what just happened.
And
and then the rumors
was famous too.
Exactly.
Like, before he was crucified, it was like this huge thing happening. People are like flooding his house, and he can't go anywhere because people are like coming down through the roof. He has to stand on a boat so that he can speak to them.
And then this crazy spectacle of the crucifixion, rumors that he's been resurrected, like that he's not in his tomb anymore shortly after, and then like, and it was only just, it was 40, basically 40 days ago. It was a short time ago.
So then maybe some people hadn't heard about it. They're like, what is he talking about? They're like, you've never heard?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, all the people coming in from out of town are like, whoa, wait, they have to like prior to like the day of Pentecost and speaking in tongues and Peter, they're like, what just happened while I was gone? Like, they're getting caught up on the
under
rumors.
A rock. Like, yes, that's where I live. It's like 30 AD. I do live under a rock.
Yeah, right. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. The way he takes them down this path, and then 32, he says he uses these, and then he uses Psalm 110, but then he's using these scriptures, and then he says, God's raised Jesus. He uses Psalm 110 to say, we're witnesses of all of this. Therefore, he's been exalted to the right hand of God. He's raised this Jesus from the dead, right? Because prior he was quoting 16, saying his flesh did not experience decay. So God raised Jesus, and we're witnesses of this. And these weren't rumors. He did actually, like, you remember when you heard that he was like not in his tomb? We're witnesses of this. He was with us. He was with us afterwards, physically. Therefore, since he's been exalted, he's been raised by God and exalted to the right hand of God. He's using those words deliberately. He's been exalted to the right hand of God. So let me hit you with Psalm 110 when he says, sit at my right hand, the Lord says to my Lord. So he's like, he's taking them down the path, but then he's playing on their emotional and their like cultural understanding of these things as well, to show them, to illuminate this truth to them. And then bam, therefore let all of the house of Israel know with certainty that God made Jesus both Lord and Messiah, the one you crucified. Like, so he goes down, and then when they heard this, they were pierced to the heart. Like he nailed it. He nailed it. He got him on every single point. He took them down the perfect path to where they're like, it's true. It's true. Oh my gosh,
man.
And they're like, what do we do? Verse 37, brothers, what should we do? It's crazy. Like, it's really, really cool as a playing it out like that. He does it perfectly.
And we don't even get the whole thing. With many other words, he testified and exhorted them.
Crazy.
That would be an awesome thing to see. Man, that would be so cool to see. Like, especially if you knew Peter. Like, can you imagine being like John here, you know, and he knows Peter, and he's like watched this whole thing happen. And then, I mean, John, he's been there and he's seen Jesus and all this. And then like this amazing thing is happening on Pentecost. And then Peter stands up in front of this giant crowd, nails it. And then 3,000 people join them to follow Jesus.
I can imagine John kind of like smugly, not smugly, but like in a good kind of like a smug for Peter, like, hey, that's my friend. And just kind of sitting back and going like, he, like a very short time ago, he denied him 3 times. And now look at him, like, you know, just with a little gleam in his eye, like, look at my friend.
Yeah.
Look at how far he's come in such a short time.
And how exciting would it be to watch this thing happen, like this miraculous thing? You hang out with Jesus, you know for sure it's real because you've been hanging out with him for like 40 days. And now you're telling people, and people, I mean, your message is compelling because you're like, who's going to stop you from sharing that message? If you just saw that happen, nobody could stop you from saying that. Like, and you know for sure, not only do you know for sure that Jesus is the Messiah, like he is the person that the whole entire Old Testament has been pointing to. Like what the Messiah that was supposed to come through the line of David, like I met him, I hung out with him, I listened to his teaching for like years. I saw him interact with his enemies, and they killed him, and then he came back from the dead. And then I have to tell you, this is the guy. And like, this is everything that he said, and this is everything that he taught us. And also, if you don't like it, I don't care, because if you kill me, I will come back because my master came back. You can't hurt me. So it's like the most compelling message, and I can deliver it with zero fear. And now Peter's standing up doing that. 3,000 people come in, more joining to their number every day. And so they're just watching this, the Church of Christ, like the church. And I guess that's the story that we get to read in the rest of Acts.
Yeah. It's interesting too how compelling this and perfect his sermon was, and it was so targeted. Like it was very perfect, but it could only have been done like this one time in history, just like this. Because he hits
that because you're wondering how could I also share the gospel with people?
Sure, but I'm also just seeing the place and time where Peter gave this sermon. And this is a once in a lifetime sermon, literally the only time that it's cool to pick this apart, because I've never picked this apart. And so it's cool to do that and see this and play it out, and then dig into these scriptures and start to get an understanding ourselves and go like, oh, now I really see what Peter's doing. So I have a greater appreciation for like this message, but I have even greater appreciation for what Peter now sees and understands. Now I'm seeing like, oh, he has this understanding that I'm trying to get to now. That like, but this is once in a lifetime, because he is hitting them personally. He's saying, whom you crucified. He's talking about witnessing the events. He's saying they happened here. You did it. You used lawless, godless people to enact, probably referring to the Romans, specifically. Like you used godless people to enact this thing. Like you even like it's all you. He's your guy, and you persecuted him, and then you use others. You brought like you, and it just happened, and it was you. It was you guys specifically. It just happened right now. It was that recent, right? Like so, it hits them more personally. It's like because we can all have these like experiences where we're like, oh yeah, we're told, like yeah, we wouldn't be probably any better if we were in their shoes. We probably would have crucified Jesus too. Maybe, I hope not, but maybe. It's likely at least that we'd be like, this guy's a little crazy. But we can understand like, well, we've sinned against God. And so like, it's just disjointed. Like it was very close to them. They just did it. There are people alive that probably witnessed Jesus's crucifixion and we're probably like, yeah, he belongs there. That might be in the crowd right now speaking with Peter. So this is like a once in a lifetime type of sermon that Peter's delivering, you know.
Man, I wonder though, if reality is fractal, then wouldn't the crucifixion also be fractal? And I mean, like the
Good
body
point.
of Jesus isn't hung up on a cross over and over again.
That's why it's so compelling. That's why sermons can still be so compelling. And then you can be 2,000 years later, still be pierced to the heart when you hear the truth.
Agreed. And what I'm getting at is if we identified the most recent crucifixion, whatever that actually is, then couldn't we speak in a way that is equally as timely as Peter is to these people in Jerusalem?
I see. Yes.
Because
that's a good point.
If like, so in the United States, maybe I'm just taking a stab at this. This might not be exactly the right thing, but hopefully you get my point. The United States was recently a Christian nation. Like it was a nation where you could just assume that the person that you're talking to is a Christian, that they value the Bible, that they believe in God, things like that, like could be assumed. And even if people didn't value the Bible and believe in God, that wasn't something they were proud of. You know, it would not have been, it wouldn't have gotten them social points.
People at least, they they went to church for social points.
Yeah, right. Because that's the way that things were. And so as a nation, we are in the process of deep in the process of turning our backs on God. And there have been some key steps along the way. The 60s, what do I really know? But I think of the 60s, like the sexual revolution in the 60s, because that's a big deal. When you decide to broadly accept sexual sin, that's a big deal because sex is one of the most fundamental clues for us to understand our relationship with God. And so when you start to get sex wrong, you start to get really confused about God and reality. And so the 60s, free love, sex before marriage began to be culturally accepted. Before that, it happened, but it was condemned, like it was publicly condemned. After the 60s, it became publicly accepted as the norm, steadily, more and more. I'm looking back over these things thinking, when did we crucify Jesus? Or has that even happened yet? Like maybe we're on our way to crucifying Jesus as a nation.
Hard to say. Yeah, it's hard because there are definitely milestone events and like we're going to take God out of the Pledge of Allegiance, so we're going to take the Bible out of school. We have like things that are just.
We took God out of the Pledge of Allegiance.
It's something that has been talked about for a long time. Some people have even done it in some schools, but it's not like. Man, but so we have little things. Yeah, so we have things that are like not that are directly against the values of God that are milestone events, and then we have certain milestone events that are they're against the virtues, but not exactly like, so they're targeted. Yeah, they're still targeted to God. And then I was thinking like the Bible out of school, for example, being like something targeted specifically to Christianity, But like the secular revolution is just as targeted at Christianity as taking the Bible out of school because it's against the way of God.
Right.
It's something. It's something directly counter to the right. So we have milestone events, but then we still have like churches in this, in the South at least. We still have churches on every corner, and so it's like they're so it almost feels worse because it's like, well, it feels like Israel. I mean, it just feels like Israel through the Old Testament, where they're like vaguely claiming to still be following the God that has blessed them so abundantly, but then they're living in this place and acting like the heathen. They're acting like the people that worship the false gods, and the people that are doing whose way that they worship their God is by doing unspeakable things, and they're acting like those people and then vaguely claiming that they still love God. And that's what it feels like. It feels like, yeah, we got churches on every corner, but like it's not just that these things are even generally accepted. It's these things are promoted, and now you're the bad guy if you don't promote the thing that is against God. You don't promote it, you're a bad guy. You at least, it's assumed you're going to accept it. That's an assumption because you have to, or else you're somehow a bad person, right?
I mean, it's turning the tables. It's the opposite of what it was before, because before, if you denigrated the Bible, I mean, that's not good for you. Now, if you criticize gay marriage, that's a sin in America. To the point, dude, this is so crazy. I have a friend who is going to seminary to be I think it's like a Christian counseling kind of degree. So he's doing a lot of study, but there's also counseling involved, and he's working as a counselor in some capacity now. And I was hanging out with him a couple days ago. He said one of his clients came in, and this was a boy in college. So he's like 18, 19, 20-ish. And my friend Nate said he came in and he told me, I just don't know if I can suck a girl's dick. And I'm like, what? And he's like, this kid is talking with his friends, and he's like, I just don't know, like, if I'm going on a date and I'm like hanging out with a girl, and then, the things end up happening, and then like turns out she has a dick. It's like, I just don't know if I can suck it. And he's like, this kid's friends were saying, they were like, especially like one person in particular was like getting on to this kid for saying that, like treating him like he's a bigot, because it's like, she's not a girl with a dick, she's a girl, and it's like
wild. That's
now this
wild.
Is like an 18-year-old today went to my friend recently and said that. I didn't know it was that bad.
I didn't either.
That an 18-year-old could like feel like, I think I have to do this thing, but I just don't know if I can do it. Like, man. And then his friends are like, blah, blah, blah.
That's so crazy. That's so crazy. I really didn't think it was that bad either. That's insane. And
I mean, it's obviously not like that everywhere, but it is at least like that somewhere. There's at least one kid with some group of friends.
And it seems like that's the way though that the things are going, right? Like that's what whoever they is, the powers that be, there is whoever's got the agenda, which is a lot of people.
Whoever's trying to make the propaganda,
that the norm. That's what is the want. That's what they want it to be like. Everything is, well, except they want the kid to not even think about it. They want the kid to be like, oh yeah, I'll suck a girl's dick. Because I'd be a bigot if I wouldn't. Why would I not? It's a girl. I like girls. She says dick. It's crazy. It's crazy. And so I don't know, back to the question, it's like, I don't know if it would matter anymore, because people have been speaking out against this kind of stuff since the sexual revolution. There have been Christians in America that have been speaking out like, this isn't the way we should be doing things. And then look where we are now. Like, it's in a sense, we've had that crucifixion. The month has gone by and we've had Peter standing up giving the sermon, and some people have been pierced to the heart. And fine, as they should. So it doesn't mean we got to stop the work. Like some people at every moment, we got to keep speaking the truth. But there might not be I'm hoping that we get this kind of turnaround where we go, oh, dang, one sermon one day, we got 3,000. And then we see that growing every day in people who are actually searching for the truth.
Well, and that's kind of my question as I'm looking at this. Peter is giving this sermon. You can't just go give this sermon to America and expect it to like be massively successful. But if you do what Peter did, which is you recognize the situation of your time, not on the timeline, but if you turn it and if you can look at it this way and know what it is. And in this time, they had literally just crucified the man, Jesus of Nazareth, and he had come up, his body was raised from the dead, and they hung out with him for 40 days, and then he ascended into heaven. So it's like, that's not our moment on the timeline. But we are at our moment on the timeline, we are experiencing something in the fractal pattern. Like we are experiencing elements from this book. And if we could identify those, what they actually are now, then we could speak to people in a way that does pierce the heart, because people know the truth. At least some people, you know, they're not so far that they're the guy like getting onto his friend because he doesn't want to do that. You know, they're not that far gone. Maybe they've deviated, maybe they're pretty deep, but if you could just identify what is actually going on, and if you could put it into words, and if you could tell them how they're complicit in what's going on, and if you could show them the path out of the swamp, then many people, not everybody, but many people would hear that and they would follow. And that's fishing for men. And I think the key is seeing what Peter sees, like that allows him to quote Joel and Psalms perfectly, to see this prophet was talking about this part of the fractal pattern, and these people have done this to the Messiah, and this is what they need to do. Like if we could just say that, then someone would hear it and they would follow.
Yeah, because I mean, the sermon was timely, right? Jesus literally just crucified recently when Peter is saying these things, but he's doing the same thing that you're describing, because he's flipping it and looking through, using the scriptures that are not relevant, but they are relevant, but they're not relevant, and they're not exactly literal for what he's saying, but he's using them appropriately for the truth. Like he's looking through, seeing the truth and extracting the truth from a time 1,000 years ago. And so and then using it to be relevant. So it's even like, so to your point, yeah, you have a good point. Like it doesn't matter. We can do the same thing. We can even use, we have to understand. It's about understanding the time we're in, understanding the truth first, understanding the time we're in, and understanding the people we're trying to express the truth to. Because it seems almost like it would be pointless to use the Bible to talk to people, and especially young people in America. It seems almost pointless.
Do you know,
even if you did,
Joel?
Right, they don't know what you're talking about. It would not be a way to express truth to them, because like it would just go over their head or in one ear and out the other. But like there is a way that we can get to. And I think we talked about this the other day, actually. There's some way that we can get to like doing this, what Peter's doing, and then going, bam, this is what the Bible's saying. And then they go, oh, and everyone goes, oh, this is what this is talking about. I see.
Can I read something to you?
Mm-hmm.
So as we're talking about this, I'm realizing like this is, and not that I'm the one and only special one, but this is what I'm trying to do with my book. And yesterday I was writing and I got a decent look at, I think, where the book is going. And one of the places that this book is going, like as I've been writing it, I've been wanting to incorporate biblical quotes because they're relevant. Kind of like Peter did in this sermon. As like I'm trying to say something and I'm like, it's just like this, it's just like this, it's just like this. And it's funny because it's like I don't have to think hard about it. Like it's not, it doesn't happen because of my effort. It's like I'm just talking about something and it just occurs to me, oh, it's just like this thing, it's just like this thing. And so maybe it's not something, I mean, maybe we're doing what we need to do to have that ability. Like we're studying the Bible and we're trying to understand it and apply it in our own lives. And then maybe the Holy Spirit then just kind of gives us what we need in the moment. We can trust that. But as that's happening, these verses are occurring to me as I'm working. I'm realizing I can't talk about this yet. Like they can't hear this yet. I have to get them through the Bible first. And so I know that I have to do that in this book. And so this outline kind of shows how I might take it there. It became clear to me yesterday as I was thinking, like maybe where I can go. So if it's okay with you, I'll read you this outline.
Sure.
So, basically, the first chapter I'm talking about, okay, we're disoriented. That is the problem of our time, is disorientation. So we're disoriented. So then let's rebuild that tower from scratch. Where can we start? What is? Well, reality is. What is reality? Reality reveals being. So like being is just like isness. There's something and not nothing. That's being. And every little thing has, if it is, it has being. So like this mouse exists, and so it has being. And so there's a line between being and everything else. So it's like this mouse exists, but fire-breathing dragons don't exist. So there's a line somewhere between this and the fire-breathing dragon. And what's the point of that line? What's the point of the distinction between everything that is and everything that is not? It reveals being, right? Because by looking at everything that is and the great variety of things that are, we can get a sense for what being itself is. And everything that is changes over time. And as it changes over time, we get an even better sense of what being is, because some things come into being and then some things cease to be. And then we can look at cause and effect. What causes something to come into being? What causes something to cease to be? What causes something to come into being that lasts a very long time? Because that it has sustained its being for a very long time. Like what happens? How is it that you can build something that lasts 100 years or 1,000 years? That's a different kind of thing than something that, a trend that lasts for 3 months and then disappears. So it tells us about what being is. And being seems to have like kind of a law, like there's a way to be that allows you to continue to be. For example, I can't just go drink bleach and not die. Like if I go drink bleach, I will die. So if I want to continue to live, I must not drink bleach. I'm subject to that law of being. There are other things like that. I mean, you and I know like sexual sin is a great way to drink bleach as a culture. Sexual sin will, like, that's one of the ways that you can cease to be. It will destroy your culture. But I'm not saying that in the book yet. But anyway, so there's a way of life, there's a way of death. Looking at what is and how things come into being and how things cease to be reveals to us the way of life and the way of death. So then it naturally leads into the question, is being good? Because here I am, I exist. There's a way for me to be that allows me to continue to exist. But as I follow that path, which we could call the way of life, it shapes my soul. Aristotle tells us that our decisions shape our soul. It etches a mark. Every time I make a decision, it etches a mark in my soul. In other words, it changes who I am. It changes my perception. It changes my likes and my dislikes. So then, do I want to submit my soul to the way of life? Do I want to become the kind of thing that the way of life will make me? Or would I rather not? Because if I want to continue to be, I must follow the way of life, and then I will become whatever that shapes me into. So is that good? The answer is we can't know for sure, because being is greater than us, and we really just have to choose to trust in it without perfect knowledge. So then, once you make that decision to trust in being, to trust in the way of life, to entrust your soul to being and the way of life, then what do? You have to be true. What does it mean to be true? It means to regard and to submit to and to faithfully represent the being of a thing. And you can do that with an object. Like for me to say that this is a wireless computer mouse, I just regarded, submitted to, and faithfully represented the being of this thing. I didn't tell you everything about it. I told you what was essential about it. Because I mean, I could have lifted it up and said, this is a gray piece of plastic, and that's not wrong, but it's not true. Like, it's not true to the being of the thing. What it is a wireless computer mouse. So we want to do that. What I just did with this mouse, we want to do that with being itself. That's what it means to be true. So I can practice with little, like more little objects that are easier for me to regard and submit to and to faithfully represent. But ultimately, what I want to do is regard, submit to, and faithfully represent being itself. Well, how is it possible to regard, submit to, and faithfully represent being itself? Like, how do you even see being itself? How is it possible to know being itself? Well, guess what? The purpose of reality is to reveal being itself. That's why there's a difference between what is and what is not. What is has being, what is not does not have being. We get to watch over time things emerge into being and cease to be. And so we can see the cause and effect patterns. It shows us the law of being. It shows us what being likes and what it dislikes, because if being likes something, it emerges into being. If being dislikes something, it ceases to be. So, and like, that's because I'm a part of reality. That purpose is my purpose. My purpose is to reveal being. And if I do that, I will continue to be. Well, people have been trying to do that for as long as human beings have existed. And human beings have persisted for a very long time. So while, Ed Hardy, if you remember those t-shirts, Ed Hardy was cool for like a year, those crazy t-shirts with like the sparkly tigers.
Yeah.
and then the trend died. It did not last very long because that trend did not conform well to being. It conformed well enough that it emerged into being for a moment, but it trespassed on the law of being enough that it disappeared pretty quickly. Well, human beings are not like that. Human beings have existed for thousands and thousands of years. And so we, to some extent, successfully regard, submit to, and faithfully represent being itself, or else we would be extinct by now. Along the way, as we have learned how to do that, we have written it down and passed it down to our children. Because being is always the same. And so regarding, submitting to, and faithfully representing being itself, like, the lessons that you learn as you do that last forever, because being lasts forever. And so if you have something that's valuable that lasts forever, that's the kind of thing that you want to pass down to your children. You're motivated to do that because you love your children. And so as they've learned things, they've written them down and they've put them in a book. And that book is called the Bible. And the Bible, it includes stories about being itself, like the commands of being itself. It includes the stories of people who sincerely, wholeheartedly strived to regard, submit to, and faithfully represent being itself. It includes the stories of people who did that successfully and the consequences. It includes the stories of people who tried to do that but failed and the consequences. And it includes the stories of people who completely disregarded and rebelled against being and the consequences. It shows us key examples so that we can understand being and how to regard, submit to, and faithfully represent it, and why we should definitely avoid rebelling against it. And it also tells us a story of a man who perfectly regarded, submitted to, and faithfully represented being itself. And because he was the perfect representation, the purpose representative of being itself, we can look at him and we can understand. It's the best way to regard being itself is to understand the man who represented it perfectly. And so this book describes what this man said about being itself. So he described it. He also told us how to regard it, submit to it, and faithfully represent it. And we can also see how other people reacted to this man. Some people chose to follow him. Some people hated him to the point that they killed him. That doesn't just tell us about this man. Because he was a perfect representative of being itself, it shows us how humanity in general, how human beings respond over and over and over to being itself. Sometimes we regard, submit to, and faithfully represent being itself. Sometimes we rebel against being itself and we remove ourselves from it, just like these people did with this man who perfectly represented it. Well, because this man perfectly represented being itself, he always remained within the law of being. He never went over to the way of death. He always walked in the way of life. Because he did that, when they killed him, he could not remain dead. Like, someone who perfectly represents being can't cease to be, because being can't cease to be. It's being. And so he came back. And they put that in the book because they wanted to tell their kids about it. And guess what? The group of people, the tradition founded on the teaching of this man has continued to be for 2,000 years, which is a testament to its conformity to the law of being itself. Christianity has survived for 2,000 years, longer than anything during that time. No language has lasted that long. No country has lasted that long. Nothing's lasted that long during that time, except Christianity. It has continued to be. And it's continued to look back at the same book, because that book and the people that read it and follow it, including the people who follow the teaching of the man who perfectly represented being itself, they conform to being. And so their tradition continues to be.
And with opposition, with heavy opposition. Like, Taoism's old too, but like, who's persecuting a Taoist? Christianity has been persecuted its entire existence all over the world. It's not only survived this long, it's continued to thrive for this long.
Yeah.
So which
then
speaks
I guess
to your point. Yeah. It speaks to the power of it.
I'm glad you said that, because I hadn't thought, but it is obvious that then you would need to answer the question, why Christianity and not Islam? So it does lead us to that conversation. But so that's it. That's the outline. So
yeah, well, that's really good. I'm glad you shared that. That's a pretty. That seems like a solid vision. I know you got to go, so I don't want to keep you. Your alarm went
I
off
have
and it's almost
until 8.
7:45.
My dad and I are starting our Bible study at 8.
Oh, okay.
Even though it is in general, it's nice for me to have a few minutes because I'll make a
we're
cup of tea. But yeah,
wrapping up anyway. But I was like, oh, we gotta go. so that's good. Okay. Yeah. So that was cool. That was awesome. That was really clear, and that's glad. I'm glad to hear that. That was good. I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, how to be able to distill that message appropriately, and like, that's what you're describing. Yeah, what you're describing. It's like we have to go from zero with people. Like, for people in America, we have to go with zero. You don't always have to go with zero for everybody, but the general, it seems, person in America, you need to go zero. For some reason, even though it's generations, we have even man-made scientific research that can at least define things. So even like starting from A we've talked about this before. It's like we're starting like from they're redefining A, B, and C. We can't even get to elemental P because they're going reasonable adults are that can they can do a job in society. They're intelligent enough to work in society. Engineers, unfortunately, even they're intelligent enough to be and competent enough to perform work in society, and they're going, yeah, there are multiple genders, and a man is not necessarily a man, and a woman is not necessarily confined to being a woman.
There's nothing wrong with two men being married and adopting children.
Or at least,
I mean, that's
but like
not every. That's probably a commonly held belief, even among engineers.
That's a commonly held belief, but I mean, worse than that. Now we're redefining gender, like something you can see out of the womb, something you can see in nature every day. Like animals aren't concerned about, switching genders and or even roles for that matter. But beyond, so we're starting behind A. It's like this is childish type of thing. Like the kid knows the difference between a boy and a girl. She doesn't have to see their parts, and she goes, "Oh, that's a boy, that's a girl," but that's there's an understanding that the parts are different. But you know what I mean? Like the pieces that make up, like you can't just have long hair. She will conflate the two sometimes because she can be confused. Oh, it has long hair and it's wearing a dress. Must be a girl. However, if there's a beard on the face, then she's just confused. She doesn't still call it a girl. Right? Like it's just because you're feminine and you have a penis doesn't make you a girl. Like, and that's where we're at. We're to the point where really you're in college. It's an 18-year-old kid. He's in college and he thinks like this. So we're starting at a place that's far beyond or far behind where even Peter talking to people 2,000 years ago that didn't have what we had. He's starting like so far ahead to be able to quote these scriptures and have them understand it.
Because he's talking to Jews
and people. He's talking to ancient people that had an understanding of at least more of a foundational understanding of truth. Generally, it's like we're being brainwashed to just disregard truth.
Well, it's like
generally
we're converting Pilate, who says, "What is truth?"
Well, yeah, it's the my truth thing, right? It's like everyone can define their own truth, and it's like that's not. But there is truth, rigid. You can't change it. You can decide you don't want to like identify it, but it's not going to make it go away. And so, and that's where we're starting with a lot of people in the West, and to figuring out how to navigate this and navigate the conversation, go to take someone from lost to like, oh, I see. You've laid down the path for me in a way that makes sense for me to follow it.
Well, and
so anyway,
that's, I haven't thought about this yet, but I have felt drawn to sharing Christ with the Jordan Peterson community. And one of the benefits of that is that everyone who follows Jordan Peterson appreciates the value of the truth. Like no one who follows Jordan Peterson is going to say, "What is truth? My truth, your truth." They're not going to say that. So it's like, at least you've got that foundation. And not only that, but you have his biblical lecture series. And so most people in that world are at least willing to say that the Bible has, like, even if it's mythological, even if it's fictional, it contains some good meta truth. Well, if you believe that, then I can talk to you about reality being fractal. And if I can talk to you about reality being fractal, then I can make the point that if fractal has to manifest in particular, like if these elements are a part of fractal reality so that we can speak of it mythologically, it must also happen historically, because the fractal manifests across every domain at every level of hierarchy, including the domain and level of human history, of the human individual. And so, yes, there is an archetype of a hero, and there's a particular person in history who embodied that most, and his name is Jesus. And so, yeah. And I guess Peter gives us a good model. I mean, I think we can learn a lot from what we read today of just Peter. I think you said it well. It's like recognizing the time that you're in and the people that you're speaking to and the truth. And it's almost like looking back at the Psalms and understanding, like reading through the particular historical details, reading through that and grasping the fractal pattern, like the underlying truth, it seems to me like the same thing as looking at the present and reading through it to recognize our fractal situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can look at Psalms and if you can read through that and grab the truth, and if you can look at the present and read through the present to recognize the truth, then you can apply Psalms to the present and speak to your peers and show them this book is relevant to today. And then they can look at time not like this, but like through it. So this is cool. Like I think we're developing our theory of evangelism.
Yeah. Well, and man, I'm interested in what we're going to be learning on Thursday. That's for sure. I mean, I'm really hoping that I'm interested to know that what I meant to send you that outline too. So I'll do so. And you can read it or look over it briefly at whatever you want. But I have a sense that this will start even more unlocking some of this stuff. Like if we can get a better grasp of the Old Testament, then read Joel chapter 2 again. And a lot of things do even seem relevant for today. Like you can read Joel chapter 2 and extract and go, okay. You can understand and extract that fractal like time truth for our current situation, even when they're talking about the generation, when they're talking about Peter talks about whatever, but the Old Testament specifically, we could see those prophetic fractal patterns, and we can absolutely, if we have a better understanding of them, we can apply them. So I'm excited for Thursday for sure.
Cool.
But
all right,
anyway,
good stuff.
I got to let you go. So appreciate it. Thanks for going long.
Yeah, always good. Talk to you tomorrow.
See you.